So, dear colleagues, I am really very glad that we can meet again on the lectures Theory of Design in frame of our PhD study of the Faculty of Architecture and Design of the Slovak University and Technology. I am very glad and honored that today we have a direct connection with London, where our current guest is active. And so let me welcome in our frame the architect and designer, Mrs. Professor Eva Jiřičná.
Good morning.
Hello,
nice
welcome.
to meet you.
I think that it's not necessary to introduce much more Professor Eva Jiřičná, the member of Royal Academy of Art, architect and designer, which her realization are abroad all over the world, and they are published and they are awarded. So at this moment, I would like to take the floor to Professor Eva Jiřičná, and maybe one notice for our guests, a lot of guests which are on the links by the Zoom, that there is a chat and you can put your question to Professor Jiřičná also in frame of the lecture, and on the end we will read this question. So, Mrs. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I try to do it very quickly because I put together too many images. So if I go too fast, please just let me know and I slow down. I'm going to start just with a general view what architecture is, and to me, of course, because everybody sees architecture in a slightly different way, because we are human beings and we are all different. And in architecture specifically, as much as in art, if we are the same as somebody else, so we are not really unique. So I think that everybody's duty is to try to find oneself and to be somewhat different to everybody else's. Once I have been asked just to find few words which would describe what is the process of the designing, or what is the process of what goes in our mind, on our head, when we start thinking about the future design, about a new problem, about something which is of creative nature. And I came up with those four words, which all of them start with a letter I. And there is one fifth, which actually is somewhat related, but does not really include the first group. The first word is inspiration. Without inspiration, there is nothing. We have to be inspired by something what we see around us. And through imagination, because we have to put things together and relate through imagination, our inspiration to an object, we can actually find a way how we interpret this process. And combined with an instinct, we can actually continue down to implementation. Now, I'm going to just what is the first inspiration which all of us have in common? That first inspiration is nature. Either it's the water, which of course water is an element which is see-through, has got no color, has got no taste. But in architectural terms, you can see reflection, you can see the movement, you can see dynamics, you can see what the light does with it, you can see what the air actually makes, how the air makes the water change in a completely different element. So that is something which is variable. And of course, the imagination and inspiration are exactly the same. They change all the time. That is a picture which I picked up a long time ago, and I've been showing it all the time because there is something which is extremely interesting, just if we try to interpret it in a way which suits the way I'm talking to you now. There is this massive element, which is the material part of the planet on which we live. It's a material part of us, material part of our brain. And above it, that is what symbolically is the intellectual part, it's the air, it's something which we can call immaterial. Symbolically, of course, it's not immaterial in the real terms. And hence, in between, there is an object which is made by hand, by people's effort. And that is the transition between the materiality and this immateriality. So this is what the man always tries to do. That is a transition of those two important things which make us. And when the man actually, through his hand, makes a statement, and that statement, of course, eventually makes architecture. What is the inspiration around us? Of course, we are surrounded by nature, and the nature produces the most amazing images. Those images are a part of us because the same way as the nature has been created, I mean, the process of us being able to walk on this planet has been exactly identical. This is what we can see, what the light and the water does. And you can see that the artists who react to our surroundings are expressing themselves in a way which is highly recognizable. Is it a nature, or is it's viola art? One of them is a water sculpture, one of them is a sculpture. And of course, if we continue, we need, if we look at the desert, we don't actually see the same thing. But a clever photographer creates this piece of art. In the same way, if architecture, you can have somebody who builds a house, but architect has to create a little bit of art in the same way as this photographer made out of the desert. It is a real photograph. There is no cheating, but those images, of course, are taken with a certain width, certain skill. And this is what we have to do. Again, I'm putting in a juxtaposition a piece of art. Again, it is viola on the left, on the right-hand side. That is a photograph in Thierry Mugler, a fashion designer, putting his fashion models in the similar kind of desert. So you can see the resemblance. You can see a different color scheme. And you can see another artist, James Turrell, who responds to these images by creating an endless space. He creates the space by just lighting different meshes in a way that you lose yourself. So these three girls dancing in the space, they don't really know when the space starts and when the space finishes. How people express themselves. I mean, if a child gets a pencil, child would probably do a similar kind of picture. These are the pictures from rock painting in Australia. Another picture, God knows what it means, but it actually, to me, I can interpret it as a communication between one's hand, which is the creative element of what we are doing, and our brain. So the brain gives the impulse, but the actual the implementation is through your hand. So how brilliant this drawing is in Argentina, I can't even tell you. And a colleague of mine has got a daughter who a long time ago was 3 years old, and she drew this picture. And if you don't know what it is a deer running in the woods, and because it's windy, so the horns are just following the direction of the wind. Now, I mean, the first and instinctive expression of any human being as a child is always almost the same as in those prehistoric caves, and in the way how we are all created from the simplicity to complexity. Nature creates extremely beautifully, and what is inside, I think it is as beautiful on the inside as it is on the outside. When you can see the complexity, of every single element which holds this little spider together, or this little caterpillar, with all the details which the nature produces. And of course, we know this process instinctively. So when we react in our design, when we actually design our details, it all goes back to these little images. That is a suction cup, of a gecko. I mean, if you look at the suction cup, in principle, it is exactly the same. So there is always, that is how the shell breathes. It's perforated so it can bring the water and the air inside. And the nature is very colorful. it is not, the nature would be boring, gray and white, like most of the architecture bits are. These are just of two funny examples. That is the eye of a fly. And now I think that I'm showing this slide because a colleague of mine once said that is the fate of an architect, this ugly rock, just of swallowing this beautiful glass body of the design, a little creature. How the life starts? You have got this beautiful egg full of goodies, full of nourishment, and full of comfort. And here you have this aggressive element, which is a sperm. But through the combination of, if I call it an attack, the most beautiful thing starts, which is a new life. So the nature knows how to actually pacify the aggression. That is, of course, symbolic. When you look at the first product of human hand, you can see that this kind of creative element, the aesthetics, are always there. It is extremely beautiful, even when we are talking about a very early development of human race. And you go to 1300 BC, and you can see how beautiful people mastered a piece of stone and how they had the need of expressing themselves creatively, and how they produced what I think it could be a completely temporary or contemporary object, which you could quite easily put on your shelf. I mean, this, I think it could be any modern artist, and nobody would be actually embarrassed about it when you saw the date on it, so you can see that I'm talking about something which was done a long time ago. New York, I think everybody knows New York, but there was another New York in Yemen 200 years ago when people went up. And of course, I mean, in our images, going up, it's always something which drives people, when it's a phallic object or whatever it is in our nature, but we are always trying to reach this kind of, what I said on the first slide, immaterial and intellectual part of our approach to life. If you look at the utopia of the Spivol, Santa area metropolis, and the first most beautiful drawing of Mies van der Rohe, when he was dreaming about creating a full glass building, he could not do it because the technology wasn't on his side at the time when he drew it. It's drawn on a what we call a buttered paper, and it's done by pencil. But of course, we have superseded that image. He would be very happy to realize his dream that time. I mean, we probably would not try to realize that dream, which of course meant a lot, again, to Corbusier, who designed, was a proposal for Paris, and lots of other, Fry Otto creating a protection against the polluted atmosphere after the war by creating all those meshes and bubbles. Ron Heron, Utopia of post-war development, making walking cities, and Paolo Soleri going underground in the desert and creating a city underground. One of the big cities and big architectural statement of my time when I was a student was Brasilia. And Brasilia looked like a dream of every single architect of my age. Now we are talking about early 60s. And when I saw it later on in life, and when you see the mess which that city created, because it is very difficult to design this city from scratch. So even if those buildings architecturally are extremely beautiful, there is no doubt about it. The real city has grown up next door to Brasilia, and Brasilia you can see somewhere in the far distance, because the life happens here, and that is just of an architectural monument. Another architectural monument is Chandigarh. What a dream and what a statement it was when it was built, and what happened because, of course, again, technology, maintenance, and our life, everything changes. So it is just an extremely disappointing experience to come and look at it now. And again, the life doesn't happen somewhere, and nobody even notices that there are children dying under the feet of those businessmen. That is what we produce every day. We are just throwing things out and creating those enormous shanty towns. And the way how we communicate is equally depressing. That is a photograph from Hong Kong. Is it architecture, or where is architecture? Is the architecture created by all this stuff which is drying up to cope with humidity? Or that is the desert after the first Gulf War? Is it architecture? And God knows what is now happening in Ukraine, so we can imagine that the war had not finished that time. On the other hand, some of the utopian ideas survived. So that is Nick Grimshaw's Eden project with this beautiful skin protecting this beautiful tropical garden. And now I'm going to take you through 55 years since I came to London and what was happening in London before I somehow started putting my hands on a piece of paper, on a drawing board, no computers, no other means of communication. That is the images of Super Studio, which affected this group called Archigram, which was really playing up with the images, what London could be like. Of course, in the sound of Beatles, presence of Twiggy. And now, in the meantime, the first project in 1968, which I actually was somewhat involved in a big organization when I came to London, it was Thamesmead. Thamesmead was a housing project which was meant to accommodate all those people who were come. So it was still this kind of post-war, the end of the post-war period, the optimism on one side and the reality on the other side. People are still really looking for somewhere to live. And the optimism in this photograph that on the River Thames, the children would be playing. What happened now? So that is the present state. Not terribly nice, is it? And when you look at the details, catastrophe. That is a new project, new developer. It's not going to be a housing scheme anymore. It is a developer's dream to put the density up to its maximum and to replace what used to be at least accommodation of people who barely needed it and who could afford it. So now it is going to be flats for sale for an enormous amount of money. And of course, it's over-designed up to the point that you think, well, should it be built? That is another building by Hungarian architect Gernot Goldfinger. He took me up when that was being built, up this tower, to look at one of the flats, one of the maisonettes, which is very much like Le Corbusier's Marseille, Cité Unitaire. And he was actually living for 3 months in the apartment, testing what he has done rightly. There are still waiting lists for flats in this building, which I'm passing by every time I go to the airport, very close to where I live. Barbican, one of the largest post-war development in London, which is still in great demand, in spite of the fact that the materials used are not entirely human. And James Sterling, very famous architect, when he did the first, I think, a glass library, of course, it had all the problems of the first glass building, leakage, overheating, and so on and so forth. But it was such a big statement for us at that time. And taking myself to 1969, I was actually found a job working on this big project of Marina in Brighton under the cliff. And funnily enough, so the partner of the firm I was working for was the son of an admiral, and he was a soldier. So he delegated. So he just asked me to get on with it. So that was several models, so where the boats could be moored. And we created this, what we call the spine, this piece of artificial land with the promontories, because I personally felt that people didn't want to live at the bottom of the cliff where the air condition, air changes, the wind eddies would make life very unpleasant. So the project went on, and it was a great experience working on site, going to site twice a week, talking to the contractors, creating all the every single drawing of these breakwaters actually came because we were just of 2 of us at the very beginning of the project. And now producing all these images, of course, unfortunately, because it was such a huge project. So Bright Marina Company, who was the client, ran out of money in 1979. And the project was abandoned for a long time and developed in a horrendous way later on, which I won't show you. So what did I do? So I just had to look for a job. And of course, because I was an associate of this big firm, so everybody thought I would be far too expensive. There was a recession in London. So eventually, by pure coincidence, met a retailer called Joseph. And I met him at the opening of his shop in Sloane Street, which was designed by Norman Foster. And his wife asked me whether I couldn't actually help them with their flat. So my contribution was moving partition between 2 sons' bedrooms. And it didn't go terribly well, but because I had no idea how to do the interiors. But shortly after, when I did it, so I put a red door handle on one of the boys' bedroom, and the wife of Joseph just thought it was so ugly. She is my great friend up to now, so but she thought it was so ugly that she burst into tears. So, and the marriage, I think, it did not last either. So Joseph asked me to find him and design a little flat for him. As you can see, all these details, GRP, big sliding doors, big industrial details. They were details, which I still was still living in the project of this Bright Marina using simple material. I had no idea how to even start doing interiors. And of course, in parallel, there were still those images, as you saw, from Archigram and from Super Studio, doing competitions, ideas competitions. That was for a gallery at Trafalgar Square, when people would fly by helicopter, and they would just go through the image when projection would actually show them what London was about, instead of traveling, using Dunlop rubber to produce all the cladding in the interior, so which you can do the ceiling, blinds, seating, flooring. And they eventually made a prototype. I won this competition, so which I don't know whether it would function in reality. But with Joseph, I just have started doing, we have done about 50 shops together. And it started off experimenting with glass suspension, it's timber, making a staircase, because I never ever handled timber. But this little picture actually has got a big story, because Richard Rogers and Norman Foster were passing by when the shop was finished. And Richard walked in and he said, "Who designed it?" And I said, "Well, I did." And he said, "You have to come and work on Lloyd's building, because they want they want wood for the interiors of this building." So I came, and the building did not exist. So I had a team. We were supposed to do all the interiors. Of course, I was involved on the ceiling, roof, and many other things, because a team of 5 people had to do a lot of other work, not only interiors. And now it was again working with the greatest engineers and experts of that time, producing this building, which looks like a midget, on the skyline of London now. These are a few pictures. Again, that is all Joseph, cafe, his shops. And then we started doing the glass staircases. The story of the glass staircases was to bring light in the basement, because all those retailers paid half the rent for the basement. but nobody wanted to come to the basement. So with the idea of having the glass staircase, you actually get the glass. And so we start, and because you never have time when you are doing shops to develop anything, so we were literally working with the designers who were producing in their workshops all these details, controlling individual elements and building it up. And that staircase then became really a trademark of what we had been doing. I'm showing you quite a few. The principle, it is really playing with the structural principles. So this is just a little mesh of the balustrading from which individual threads are suspended. And then you just have to find the details how to do it. This little tube in the middle, structurally, it is just the spiral which you cut out of that tube, which is structurally functional. So we remove the rest of it and make these ribbons, which create the central part of the staircase. And now that is the client who did not really want any hard materials in his flat, and suddenly, poor guy, he finished with stainless steel. And now he still lives there. It was done in 1982, and he still lives there very happily. Hasn't changed the kitchen. But this is also what you learn when you start doing interiors, how important the light is and how you can work with light and how you can control light and create the atmosphere and create what we call comfortable. And that is another shop in London for an American company. We did, again, 30 shops all over America. A different principle, again, different structural principle supporting, again, glass threads. And a nightclub when we had problems with fire escapes and so on. So the threads had to be supported sitting on a metal plate just in case the glass broke. That is the house of one of the most famous engineers, Ovarab himself. Ovarab was an engineer of Brighton Marina project, and he built himself a house which was sold by his children who didn't like it to a South American developer. So we had to add the swimming pool because he wanted to demolish the house, but of course I could not demolish the house of somebody who I worked with. So we just tried to design the space to follow the principle which I learned from him, because he used to say that when we were working on this Brighton Marina project, how important it is to save materials, because we will run out of all the materials in future. We are getting to that stage now. The smaller the amount of materials is, and of course you can affect it by using the structure and interpretation of and the structure in a way to save the material. So if you put steel in tension, so of course you use minimal amount of steel. If you put the steel compression, so the steel is quite massive. The same applies to concrete and all the other materials. So the minimalization of the materials when we design things, to me, it's very important. It's terribly, terribly difficult to persuade the developers and to this and people who pay for it, just to follow it in practice. But I think that you, as a young generation, I think it will be all in a situation that we will simply have to do it. There won't be an option. This guy came from Scandinavia, so we try to maintain the character. And of course we make the change, but this guy was really interested that his television comes up at the right time when the football match starts, rather than the architecture of what we were doing for him. That is another project when we were again trying to use glass in structural form. That the conservatory is just of glass boards, glass connections. And now we are in early 90s. It is a long time ago when we were doing these projects. And I'm going back only so that you can see the development. And still this kind of escape going to all those ideas competitions, when I could imagine that I would be in the shop with the glass floor, glass ceiling, revolving cabinets. That time it was practically impossible to do the bent glass, or cylindrical cabinets were almost out of question because they were either not safe or nobody could actually make it. So, but these images, I mean, this competition was for a space which we eventually 10 years later got for another client. We still could not do cylindrical display cabinets. It was 95, but we tried to do as much image close to what we initially tried. He sells very expensive watches. And now comes to 1992, and we have been asked to make a project for the orangery at Prague's castle. And of course, it was the period of time when shortly after 1989, the Velvet Revolution, there was nobody who wanted to do anything properly because the skill was completely destroyed by the communist regime. And we couldn't find any, 24 people collected the tender document, and nobody actually returned it because nobody could do it. So we approached a company in Germany called Zelle, and we started working on the details. The condition which we were given was that the structure has to be completely demountable. And in one of the warehouses of Skoda motor cars, these guys who were partially people who previously designed Skoda car, and they had most beautiful drawing. They just didn't know how to build. So we are here in the space with the structure and standing up, but it was moving from left to right, and we couldn't stabilize it. So we were desperately looking for the solution. So that is our structure engineer. That is the guy at the Technical University in Prague testing this little node, and me and my colleague behind me looking at it, as you can see, looking terribly worried because it did not seem to take the loading which was expected from it. Well, what was the problem? England went metric in 1968 when I came to England. So I had to learn to draw in inches and 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch, and edit it all up, which was a really pain in the neck. But now they bought the screws in Sheffield, and Sheffield is the city in England very famous for steel production. But they had the drills German, and they drilled a house for recessed screw heads, which hold these nodes together. And now those two, the metric system and the imperial system, did not match. So therefore, the tension of the cone in a cone was not really properly transferred. So we had to, with a British drill, we had to re-drill 500 holes in order to make the structure stand up. It is still standing, so hopefully it will be there for a while. And another project again, which is again in Prague, very close to National Theatre. Again, there was nobody who wanted to do the staircase in order to have an access to the loft. And that is the project of the loft itself, which was one of the first conversions which we have done in Prague. That is another bigger project, another conversion, not only of a loft, very beautiful loft, in the church, which was purchased by Havel's Foundation for 1 crown when he could have his ecumenical conferences. This place was completely, we made a model because the place was being used as a storage for, initially it was a Gothic church in the 13th century, rebuilt many times, had no foundation, the walls were completely damp, and the loft was covered, and there were 4 heavy floors in the middle. So we thought if we remove it, and we did it with the help of this model, which actually, shows exactly where it is, because the intention was to leave it as a ruin. So that is how we were working on it after the floors were removed. So suddenly we were discovering layers and layers of murals, frescoes, and Havel was extremely excited about the space. So we eventually finished with the space being left like a ruin with a view into this very beautiful loft. But to get a planning approval took years, because they just wanted to put a glass ceiling or heavy ceiling between the nave and the roof, because they said in Central Europe, lofts were never exposed to the human side. Well, we eventually won this battle, and luckily this beautiful loft is actually visible. And now it shows the skill of those really primitive workers. And it has got the most extraordinary acoustics, which I think it was not our contribution. It just so happens to be the case. And when Havel was working on the project, he saw that Prince Charles could help him to get some sponsors for the project. So, and it was full of scaffolding still. So, and I had to take Prince Charles up and down. When he was going down, he looked at one of the heads of this little angel supporting, what used to be the Gothic vaulting. And he said, "What is that?" So I said, "Well, it's the head of the angel, from the 13th century. And he said, sorry, I beg your pardon, from the Baroque period, because the actual angel heads were added during the Baroque conversion." He said, "Take it all off. You have got enough of Baroque architecture in Prague. You don't need any more." So people do have different views when it comes to architecture. This is, when you can see how the centuries passed by, and now this creative human hand just to make a statement whether it's a hand of a Christ or whether it is a head of Mary Magdalene. And the first opening, the Havel's 65th birthday. Project of a bus station, which was a part of the Jubilee line. So we are now talking about year 2000. We are getting there. So just have to have a look how late I am. Well, I think I've got 15 more minutes to take you through to the end, maybe 20. So we had only these 3 supports because there is an underground tunnel underneath and we couldn't load it. So hence it looks like a bird with those wings, which are stabilized against the wall. And now we try to make it a little bit more interesting, that now silver aluminum cladding. So this little glass monster is a beam which holds those wings together. And now they just spread from, and so we only support that central spine. Next project comes just before the year 2000, which is a project for the Hotel Joseph in Prague. There was a permission to create the same building on the other side of the road. So, and we somehow won the argument that we were creating just of the completion of this 19th century building. So it is like a tale of this 19th century heavily decorated building. So at least we try to use the texture, we used to use shading, so the rooms would not be overheated, so they would not have to have those green and brown films to stop the excessive heat coming in. And there is a courtyard, and now there's one building in the back, one building in front. And that was done in 1992. It's going to be redone now, and of course we try to do glass bathrooms in order to minimize the impact of another massive structure inside the interiors of the very small rooms. And now there is a glass staircase, which was actually done by Mr. Růžička. So when we used to do the first staircases, we had to go to either Zelle or to London to England for the manufacturers. But now I think that we found very beautiful collaboration with people in Czech Republic who suddenly started learning the skill and who are now doing staircases for us all over the world rather than using the British people from Newcastle and the north of England to travel for us, even if it is not entirely the case. I think the mixture of both is still on the list. That is a little historic building in London. Down here, there was a house in which Mozart, as a young boy, stayed with his father. So the street is called Mozart Terrace. And this building was bombed in 1944. So we eventually got a permission as a historic building to put some parts of the interior into the original state. But we were actually allowed to build over the courtyard, put the glass roof over the courtyard and come from one building, which is facing the street, to another building, which is in the back with a swimming pool, moving bridge and a garden. Few developers, projects for developers, furnishing some of the penthouses which they couldn't sell. So I think at this one we have done for 2 million British pounds and it was sold for 19 million. We even had a glass bath, which I've been told was very comfortable, and a bed which turns so you can either watch the sunset or the sunrise. And a few projects in the Victoria and Albert Museum. When we did the master plan, we worked in this museum for 10 years, from the front door through the reception, revolving doors, and to a shop through which you walk into the sculpture gallery. Another sculpture gallery on the floor above. It's just of huge glass cabinets. And the most difficult of all, and probably most demanding, the jewelry gallery, which has been attended by 20 million people by now. And to be honest, when we designed it, I never saw that it was buildable. These central display cabinets have got no metal support. It is all supported by glass, which is glued together, and the glass doors. And now it was a German manufacturer who made it. And it is now 15 years ago. And that time the technology of glass was still at a very embryonic form. So the amount of sleepless nights I had on this project, I can't actually tell you. There is another glass staircase, which again, I think it is done yet on another structural principle. And there is another project that is how we started designing a house on the top of the hill in Prague, overlooking the river and looking towards the castle. I haven't got the photograph. I mean, the house was finished 10 years ago, but the client is only moving in it now from various family reasons. So the house was empty. And so I've got some of the construction pictures and few of the finishing of the interior. Most magnificent view, another staircase connecting the basement. At the shop in London. And that is what the Harrods, one of the biggest department stores in London, look like. And we changed it into the jewelry department, which looks like this. And now I'm going to take you to the town where I was born, Zlín, which I think that you probably know more about than I might remember. But I was born in one of these little houses. My father was an architect for Bata between 1938 and 1945. I was sitting somewhere down here with my mom when the factory was being bombed, and I could see the flames coming up. So my memories, but that is something where I was living. Of course, Bata was an absolutely extraordinary phenomenon of that time, Czechoslovakia. I have to include you, my dear friends. He was not only producing and finding the best way and the most effective way of producing shoes, but he was making tires, dealing with leather, producing aeroplanes, in which he was also killed. And he had a great interest in education. Everybody who worked for him had to be educated. When he died, one of his architects built what I consider one of the most important glass structure from the period of modernism. Unfortunately, it has been now reconstructed, and I don't think it looks the same, but anyway, so there are different opinions. Not going to criticize it, but to build that in 1932, so was one of the greatest architectural statements in Central Europe. Here we see Le Corbusier advising him on the future project. And here are so-called Masaryk schools, very close to the factory. And everybody who was working for Bata in the factory had to learn languages, and it was really further education. We would call it now further education, which was produced by Bata even in that time, and nobody else heard about it. Well, those two buildings, that is the gym, collapsed. So we were asked to redesign, first of all, the university building, then the Philharmonic Orchestra, and then the Faculty of Human Science. That is a very old picture. It looks different now. So that is the Philharmonic Orchestra building, when we again had very, very little money. And because it is a valley, so you look at the roof. So we tried to do the roof somewhat more interesting than just a concrete shell. It's been now more than 10 years. Certain things, work out as they should. Certain things need a little bit of maintenance, which people don't give it. But that is really the process of working on it. I mean, being an architect, it means that you spend most of your time in an environment like this. And what is really important to know, that the people who work here are your best friends. They do have to work in absolutely in human conditions, mud, wind, cold, and so on. And they would do anything for you if you trust them. And the best thing is if you can share a cup of tea in England or coffee in Czech Republic, which has never been washed, but that is a sign of the real friendship, which usually lasts for life. Where does the inspiration come from? I just thought when we were working on the design of this Philharmonic Orchestra building, so I saw this little diatom in a book, and hence we have got these two beams, because we could not put any loading on the center of this 12 centimeter deep concrete shell. So all the load has to be put on the perimeter of that oval shape. So these two beams just to carry the load into these endpoints, and these are just connecting ribs. So that is exactly what you can see, those two big ribs and the connecting ribs going onto the perimeter shell. You work in conditions, it was the winter before the opening when you couldn't even see, and those guys were welding on the roof. And this little nest on a crane was being moved but the bird survived, and a few little birds flew up just before the opening. I think that nature is very strong, so nature can survive in any conditions. These are a few interiors of the buildings. That is the University Library with the big atrium. The outside, we had to wrap up the building with another skin out of acoustic requirements, and also because we didn't have money to spend on a proper facade. This is what it does at night. And the inside being tested for the acoustics foyer. The most amazing discussion was when our graphic designers just put the pictures on the male toilets and similar one on the women's, but it was a Dane. So man did not want to be, I say it in Czech, paroháči, it is cocoon in English. And the ladies thought that it was a goat, so they didn't want, but I think it both of those little sketches survived. And the local newspaper published these absolutely amazing little pictures shortly after we completed the building. You know, the genius who did this silo somewhere nearby before we even started thinking about just putting the appropriate roofing of an oval shape. So I think that he really deserves the prize. That's yet another building, which is the Faculty of Human Science, which was finished very recently. Again, with an atrium, when you see the colors of the spring nature, like when you move up on the aeroplane, so you see all those really luscious greens and yellows. One of the conference rooms, the roof over it in metal cladding. Another project in Prague, which is waiting now for planning approval if we ever get it, because behind his building, somebody put the window from his bathroom to the outside of the facade. We got the permission to use it, so we are now waiting how we are going to resolve the problem that we can actually build this building. That is a hotel in London, which this one probably will not get built because I think it's too modern for the part of London where it is, which is Greenwich. That was meant to be the bridge in Ostrava, but of course the developer changed his mind and now decided to leave the existing situation instead of building a new bridge. And that was a very big project finished about 7 years ago in New York, which was a glass staircase. I mean, to make a glass staircase in a public building, it's a museum facing Central Park, on the top of Central Park. And this is how we tested the material. So all this weight sits on this glass thread, which is supported by these glass fins. And that is our engineer. These are the guys making the staircase. You know, before you do anything, so we do a huge amount of testing. And I could never believe that this little cantilevered piece of glass with the glass thread, laminated glass thread, could actually support a load, as you could see it. And now that is when we are testing the lighting. That's it. That's the supporting structure. Each thread is supported by a piece of glass like this. That is during the construction. And that's when it's finished. Another staircase in Somerset House, which the client wanted a glass staircase, but you know, it's a building which was built in the 17th century. there is a famous staircase of an architect called Chambers in this corner. We could not do the glass staircase, which would need some maintenance. So we took the inspiration in these strangled trees, when you have all those plants growing and they eventually kill the tree inside them and they become structurally extremely stable. So this staircase, which goes up 3 floors, but each floor has got 2 because now 6.5 height. There's a 6.5 height between the floors. So each of those stands twice before it reaches the top level. And we just have decided to use the material called ductile, which is a new generation of concrete. It is stabilized in the center by this metal mesh like this. And we found a factory in Italy, that is the lady who owns the factory. And this is how they are making the threads. They cast this material which is 10 times stronger than concrete, which has got an organic or metallic fiber to hold it together. And that is how you cast it. So that is a piece of landing coming out of the mold. And it's self-cleansing because it is not porous. It's vibrated up to the point that there are no pores, so it doesn't actually hold any that. And now I am back in Ostrava. That is a haunted building, from the time when I was 1968, this building, when I was leaving Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, so this building was built. It became a haunted house because it was not built to the standard that people could survive in. To demolish those concrete buildings, it's a huge amount of carbon emission, and it's also a huge amount of money. So we made a project when we reconstructed this building. And because the building was over-designed, because that time everybody was not really trying to save any materials, so the columns can take quite a bit of extra loading. So that is our proposal, how to change this building and produce really more habitable accommodation. And also the city decided that they were going to maintain the green planters, so the building is going to be surrounded by nature. Hopefully, at the moment, now there are a few firms competing for doing design and build. So we'll see what happens at the end of the month, which is very close. And these are a few projects for Prague, there are 4 of those buildings, 2 of them are under construction. Again, we are always trying to add space for the greenery. That's another project in a different part of Prague. Again, as much green as we possibly can do it. And a Renaissance castle, where in the top space we are actually reconstructing a music hall. So there is a very beautiful loft, and we are trying just to take off the concrete ceiling which was there and just to get a little bit of height. And we produce 2 schemes. One of them is made of plaster, a little bubbles, because we need something hard and solid for the acoustics. And here we try to do it in timber. The client actually selected the first version, which is now being done. And the project at Žižkov in Prague, when all this complex is full of asbestos and has to go. And so there was a competition which we won to replace it. Now the development, when we could go up to, the conditions of the competition allowed us to go up to 100 meters. So I'm only going to show you how much work has gone. If I show you what I'm showing you, that is about 1/100th of the amount of work on the models, drawings, sketches, And eventually, we just produce all those different shapes, try to understand the scale of it. So that is the church of Ludmila in Prague, which is very famous. So we just try to put beside with all those towers into it. And that is those tall buildings actually, just fit exactly the size of the elevation, the church. So that is the photograph of the model. Few visual images. Of course, it's not going to be built because the historic building department decided that no, it is too tall. We worked with OBERAP, so we have got all the drawings, of what are the stresses, what are the construction detail. So we really did a huge amount of research to wind conditions. And then we were told by the historic building department that the building was not at all, technically thought about. So we are now working on an alternative scheme, which I can't show you because it's in an embryonic stage. And this is, that is already existing. So that would have to be, there are two versions. One of them is the extra tall, and one of them is going only up to 110 meters. So, but never mind. So we just at least made a joke, took this kind of extrusion. The Royal Academy has got a summer exhibition, and so we put in summer exhibition a joke how these tall buildings could be plugged into different cities in China, London, Australia. So, and now I'm just going to finish, so with few slides. That is one of the major projects of the 70s, the Opera House in or the theatre, I beg your pardon, not Opera House, the theatre in London, done by Lasdun, one of the famous architects of that period. And what happens? That you get boring, just that is the public assessment of the architect's effort. And now I'm letting you to read what another artist just has said about architecture developments and the money, because it's a little bit rude, so I'm not going to read through it, but you can see it yourself. And now, we have got different kind of walls. So there was a wall which was built between, I was in Berlin in 1961 when the wall was built between East and West Berlin. I was in Berlin again when the wall was taken down. This is the wall between Palestine and Israel. And the artist drew this picture, on the wall of a little boy playing on a sandpit. So the artist and the art and our intellectual strength is much bigger than the tanks. So we can eventually make holes in any material. And these pictures, going back to something which I said about the instinct at the very beginning, this is a picture of the molecule of ferrum, of iron. That is the molecule of aluminium. That is the molecule for gold. And that is electromagnetic field. And I've forgotten what of. But all these individual elements circulate through our blood. You can see that there is a lot of architectural expression in them. So, our instinctive behavior is still there. So let's try not to kill it. And that is, somebody gave me these two pictures. It is a bud now of a poppy. If you can see what this little thing, those very fine petals, have to do in order to get rid of this massive, hard, aggressive skin in order to blow up. That is our life. That's what we have to do. That's our task. to go through it. And even if we might in future live in walking cities or up in the air or under the water, we are living in a world which is absolutely packed with coordinates of any kind. So when it comes to it, we still do it like this. We start, we go up and down through dead end, through mess ups, going back, get lost, get back, go left, right, up, detour, up, through who knows. And then, unfortunately, I can't read it, so I just will try to. No, okay. So now when we introduce a little bit of experience, understanding, great deal of courage every day, huge amount of luck, we are always short of luck, talent, modesty, discipline, and effort. And this effort and work create a sea of sweat. So most of the time, we miss the target completely. Sometimes we have got a near miss, and hardly ever we have got a direct hit. Thank you very much for listening to me for so long.
Thank you a lot, Mrs. Professor. It was really very nice and very interesting lecture. I think it was a third time what you have been at the Faculty of Architecture of our university. Yes. I think it was great. We are in time, so we have some minutes for a question if you would like to put to our interesting guest. Would you like?
Thank you very much for the interesting lecture, and something that I've wanted to know for quite a while. Your work uses a lot of glass. Would you say that there's so much more we can still do with glass as a construction material, or have we reached the limits of what we can achieve with that? What's your opinion on that?
Absolutely. Glass is the material which I think when I started using the glass, it was just of glass which broke. So hence our first staircases, we had just of a piece of plate glass on a piece of perspex, which was supposed to hold it. Lamination was in an embryonic stage, toughening, using chemical toughening, using, it was so limited what we could do with glass. And now I think, if we wanted to, we could build buildings. Now we are working on another system, which is, how we can have glass buildings without allowing enough light coming into the interiors, but without having excessive heat. So, technology is moving very, very fast. And I think sometimes it feels that we even overdo it, because if my grade is, it's almost a joke, we do now not double glazing, we are in triple glazing. And the glass wall is almost the same coefficient as it is a solid wall. So, you can, in theory, construct glass buildings if you wanted to. The problem is the maintenance at the moment. So there are people who are in the same way as, we have got this ductile, which is self-cleansing. So there are lots of theories how you can make self-cleansing glass. And also, you make the windows and you make them so perfect, and then you have to make holes in the window frames in order to stop people from suffocating in the interior, which always kills me, when we have to put those terrible ventilation grills in a beautiful finished product. And but I do expect that the technology of glass is going to move faster and faster, because it's a material which is, it ages beautifully. You can always clean it. It's hygienic. And it plays with glass. It's just that you have to learn how to use it. And it's still, you have to have really good engineers to work with to make it safe, because still, you can actually have problems by the glass breaking and hurting somebody if people are not going to respect the fact that the material has got certain limitations. But I do believe that the glass is one of the materials of the future.
Most of our students and guests are actually online, so they also put some questions on the chat. So I would like to ask my colleague, Vice Dean Morgenstein, to read these questions.
Okay, so I have here one question from Jiří Slaný. I also put it on the screen. The question is, can you explain how does it work if you design in other countries? For example, if you win competition, do you have to cooperate with architect from this country? And how important is licensing for architects? I have heard many famous architects don't have license. For example, Renzo Piano doesn't in the UK, and he has studio in the UK. Thanks.
It depends. The architect himself does not need to have a license, supposing that his studio is licensed and insured. And generally speaking, I've never worked in a foreign country without, with another architect, because somebody has to put in the planning application. And the planning application, has to be guaranteed by somebody who has got the qualification of the country where the project is. I'm just trying to think, so for example, when we did a project in New York, which was the museum, we worked with a New York architect, and he actually applied for all the permissions. He approved of our drawings. We had our drawings also. It's different in every country. In France, I could actually register if I wanted to, because we did quite a big project. Unfortunately, the client doesn't want the project to be shown. But I was given an option to register as to get the French qualification. And I was almost ready to get it, and then the client found out that it was actually more expensive, because your insurance, goes up if you work as a foreign architect in a foreign country. So we then hired another French architect, and we have done. We did all the drawings. He just basically signed the drawings, but he took the responsibility. The responsibility actually goes on us, because we had a letter when we took over the responsibility, just in case there was a problem. Our insurance covered as well. It's, I don't know how to simply explain it, because it is completely different in Italy. It's completely different in America. In Australia, it was something which I never understood, to be honest. So I would have to ask somebody from our project management, just to answer the question. But the basic rule is, if you win a competition in a foreign country, you do engage an architect of the country to work with you, and then you have to very carefully specify the responsibilities of each, and form a consortium or joint venture, it's called, so how we are going to work together. I don't know whether I answered it properly, but no, it is quite a complex. It's not easy. But Renzo Piano doesn't need the qualification, because I think lots of people in his office have it. So I do know lots of architects who haven't got the qualification, but because the people in the office have it. So the office is registered. That works with the RIBA, Royal Institute of British Architects. I don't know whether it works in a similar way in other countries.
We have also a different question from Matusz Kiaczek. It's a longer one. Maybe if Matusz is here, he could pose it himself. If not, I can read it, of course. But it would be nice if we have so many people in the chat to also see you and not just black windows. So if you are able to turn on cameras and ask directly, it's perfect. So I see Matusz is here, so you can ask the question, please.
So, thank you for your inspirational speech. And may I ask you if you think that in spite of the disappointing results of the precise utopian projects, it should remain the crucial architect's interest? And would it be actually the end of humanity and creativity and culture if people stopped dreaming?
I see if you actually written it down. I could hardly hear you. I'm really sorry. So I don't know what I should. I heard part of it, but could you please? I tried to listen carefully. If you could please repeat the question.
Yeah, that if you think that in spite of the disappointing results of some utopian projects, it should remain the crucial architect's interest, and if it is important to still dream about some visions, or if it is better to deal just with reality.
You know, I think it may be that I could use as an example the project of Octopus, Jan Kaplický's library. That project, I think it would have been built. It would have been a great asset had it been built in time for Prague. Now, if it is built now, I've been talking to somebody about it a couple of days ago. You know, it's now almost 15 years since he designed the project. And everything, technology, the law, building, instructions, and the way how the materials develop and our restrictions, and everything changes. We had a similar kind of project in London, which was designed by Mies van der Rohe, and he died, and the project wasn't built. I personally believe that it's better not to build a project without the architect who designed it. So that comes to examples like Mies van der Rohe and Jan Kaplický. If the architect is still alive and the project changes, you know, it's not the end of the world. Lots of people, you know, who work on a project learn a lot from each competition. That knowledge becomes a part of you. It becomes, you know, the entity which you own. Sometimes, you know, those endless fights. We are now doing a hospital which was delayed for 10 years. And I wish we could start again and designing it again, because 10 years is such a long time. And we are now, you know, building it according to what we saw 10 years ago. And it's just somehow, you know, lots of projects which I personally worked on have gone. So they were built, now people sold the property or joined the shop, they don't exist anymore. I think that I have learned a huge deal, try to pass on the knowledge which I learned on to the generation which comes after me as much as I could. You know, it's only a project. There are many more important things in life than fighting from something which is unwinnable. Somehow, you know, it is a great shame when the projects are rejected for somebody's stupidity. That is really, really painful. And it shouldn't be happening. And maybe we should try, you know, just of somehow to find a way of communication between the historic building department and all the other authorities, and also educate general public that the new project does not always need to be rejected because it upsets one unit or another. But what shall I say? Maybe I'm so old, so I just learn this kind of tolerance. Yeah, I fight like a lion until the point I can, but when it becomes, kind of unwinnable, or when it leads to some kind of compromise or stupid, decision which affects the quality of the project, I think it is better just to put it in a bin and try again and do something else and move on. I don't know whether I'm answering your question properly, but I think that, to build Jan Kaplický's library now, I think that he himself, because I knew him for 60 years, so I think that he would be changing it. He would like to change it. He would not like to build it as it was, because he was constantly changing everything all the time. And now I think that now, it shouldn't have happened. It's absolutely true. It was a very sad story, like many others. And I'm just using her as an example. But unfortunately, I think that it happened in the past. And it will probably happen for a while, but no, I don't really. Yes, it would be nice if good buildings get built, and some of the good buildings do get built, not usually in Central Europe. It's not only us, but no, I think that my colleague, my next door neighbor, is doing a Polish competition, and he's facing exactly the same trouble in Poland, even if Poland is doing fantastic things with Ukraine. So I think that on the planning law, I think that there are problems as well. So there is lots of opposition against really good design, so but I mean, what can we do?
Yeah, thank you for the answer. And I also have one question. You've mentioned that the minimalization of materiality is the most important to you. And have you been aware of that since the beginning of your career, or it has just changed in the time?
Have I been aware of?
Yeah, of the minimalization of materiality since the beginning of your career, or if it has just changed.
Yes, well, as far as I'm concerned, I live in a box. I haven't got practically anything on the wall. I have got now, I've got absolutely minimum amount of stuff around me. And I start with the minimum, but unfortunately, people just collect things. You design something and you come back a few months later. I think that we have to find a discipline and not to keep too many things around us. That is because our lives have changed. I just to tell you an example. I came to a flat when they have two children, 7 and 12, right? No, 7 and 11. And I couldn't see any toys, so I asked the parents, I said, because I used to come to houses and flats where the children live, which were absolutely overloaded with toys, toys everywhere, so there was never enough toys under every Christmas, huge amount of toys under the Christmas tree. And now I just couldn't see any toys. And so the person pointed at the PlayStation, and he said, well, they either play with the PlayStation or with the telephone, or they go out and swim, or so there were no toys. So that is a big change. I think that we also, and that is something which we all have to do, and we have to minimize the amount of stuff which we buy to wear. I mean, it is just a huge amount of carbon emission. What is happening in China, India, when I'm making all those bits of garments, which we use once or twice and throw it out. And honestly, this is just not going to last. I think that in future we have to be much more selective of what we keep. It's also when you look at the housing and what is the flats which we are working on. So there are few square meters, so the family has got such small amount of space, to live in. So we have to somehow change our life, because otherwise we live in a storage. And that is something which I think it probably started happening with COVID and so on and so forth, because the shops were locked, and suddenly people don't need to go to hairdresser every week, and people don't need to buy a new jacket every season. I think that, you know, there are huge changes in our life, I mean, good and bad. And I think that the architecture is going to absorb those changes. But as far as the materials are concerned for the production of the building, I really sincerely believe that something drastic has to happen, that our engineers, because we can't do it as architects, we haven't got the knowledge to calculate, you know, so things, but there are so few practices which actually, you know, concentrate on saving the car. I mean, I live in London, and you know, we cannot design parking spaces in central London anymore. I can't drive to the center of London. I walk, you know, everywhere. People take bikes and so on and so forth. I mean, in Central Europe, it's still has not gone deep enough, but we will all have to do it. And the materials, you know, if you, I just have heard it, and now I don't want to quote it because I've forgotten the exact number, but the production of cement for concrete, I think, represents, if I, you know, I think it is 1/3 of the total carbon emission, you know, which this planet is counting on. I think it is, I cannot guarantee it is the right number because I've forgotten the right number, but I think it's huge. When I heard it, I was absolutely shocked. So I think that if we can minimize every single piece of concrete on any building, which we are doing, but we have to work closely with the engineers. And this is what I have to say, you know, when I came to England in 1968, so all those engineers working, you know, that time it was steel and metal, which I think it was being developed, but working very closely with the engineers, practically trying to use structural principle to minimize the amount of material is much more common here than it is. And I'm not only saying Czech Republic or I don't know, Slovakia, but I think that France is doing reasonably well, Italy so. But, you know, we just really have to start thinking carefully about every single step, what we are doing and why we are doing it. And only in that way we are going to save the planet. It's really getting serious.
Are there, Peter, any other questions?
Thank you.
Sorry, I can't hear you now.
Thank you for the answer. And may I also ask maybe the final question from my side, that what is your attitude to ephemeral architecture? Because glass is sometimes also connected with such architecture that is just for a short time, or architecture that changes in time, for example, the color or for example, the function. If you are also keen on ephemeral architecture as well.
I didn't, you know, I'm really suffering because I can hear you kind of partially. Can you go back? I heard the end of it, but what was it about the glass?
If you are also interested in ephemeral architecture.
In ephemeral architecture, yes, yeah. Yes, I'm interested in ephemeral architecture, and you know, this is why I started with the imagination, interpretation, and so on, and inspiration. Yes, you live in a world which is full of images, and most of the time you cannot actually turn those images into reality. On the other hand, if you haven't got the word, you know, this ephemeral word, if I understand what you mean, you could do nothing, So I think that even if, let's say, 10% or 1% or whatever it is, even if the minima of this kind of imagery and intentions and thinking which goes on in your head happens, I think that it's a success. Of course it would be great, but it's also, you keep learning all your life. I mean, what is so terrific about architecture is that you never get bored, because there is always something new which happens, So, and now if I look back at my life, so how much we are now trying to think about nature being a part of us, being a part of our life. When I was a student, nobody talked about nature in a way as we do now. Nobody actually was trying to learn from nature. It's, the development of people who work in any of those other sciences, they are making research which has to be brought back to architecture, which has to somehow come back to our thinking. And I'm going to say something which I actually meant to say at the beginning. I had one of my best professors I ever had was Jaroslav Wagner. And he, in one of our sessions, when I was kind of getting tired because he was smoking a lot, and he always took 3-4 years going through students' projects. And it was about midnight, and we were still talking about my building. And he asked me about the doors, and I said, "No, but professor or door handler," I said, "It is not architecture." And he said, "Now, for our next session, bring me 3 things which don't concern architecture." And I've learned later on in life that I'm still looking, because everything in one way or another is somehow connected to architecture. In a real way, ephemeral way, imagination, inspiration, everything what happens around you, you can turn back to something which you are actually producing, on a piece of paper, on computer screen, and which goes back to the computer. Yes, it is not that we are just solving the geometry and the thickness of the structure, but you have to have some kind of deeper ideas what you are here for and what your duty is. And of course, the interpretation is different from every single of us. So we are all different, and we all see things differently, but thanks God for that, how boring life would be if we are all the same.
Our time is really running very quickly, so maybe the last question, if anyone who is online would like to put a direct question to Professor Jiřičná, please put your hand or ask directly. It was the last possibility. So if not, because we are, I would like at the end really thank again Professor Jiřičná that we have the possibility today to be with you, and you was with us. And I would like to thank you that you have found a free time in your, I think, really very busy calendar. And for the first time, you are again at the Faculty of Architecture and Design. And I would like to explain my wish that maybe it was not the last time what we are together.
Love to come back. Thank you.
It was really very nice time to you. And I would like again to thank you and to wish you a nice day in London.
I wish you a nice day, all of you.
Okay, thank you.
Happy life, you have got the future ahead of you. So
thank you.
Do whatever you can and enjoy it and have fun.
Yeah. Okay. Have a nice day. Goodbye.
You too. And take care. And thank you. Thank you for inviting me.